live underneath my picture. I don't. Do you?
Yes, it's
Oh,
live according to me.
okay. Well, very good afternoon to you from Istanbul. So it's now noon here, and you left me to the end. So most of my things that I was going to mention, you already said. So, like, that's a shame, but I'll try to, make it less repetitive and try to include sort of new things in there as we go along. So, yes, I work at Istanbul Aydin University, and I'm part of the Friends project, and we've been working together on this project for 3 years now. So I had a chance to sort of think about these issues more than usual because of this project as well. So that was really a benefit for my professional development as well. So let me add that from the beginning. So next slide, please, Andy. So let me just start with a very sort of brief definition of what culture is. It's the way of life, customs, and beliefs of a particular group of people in a particular sort of time period. So next slide, after stating the obvious, but I think there are two very useful metaphors about culture, and one is the onion and the other one is the iceberg. So basically, the outer shell of the onion, what you see first, or the tip of the iceberg, again, what is very visible instantly to everyone's eye, are the physical artifacts and attributes of a culture. So the way people speak, the way sort of they dress, those are, instantly recognizable things that you know about a culture. But then sort of as you go inside the onion, the inside layers of the onion, or just like towards the sort of the sea level of the iceberg, there are the norms and values associated with a culture. And these are not instantly recognizable, but if you spend time with a person from a different culture, talk to them about, sort of uh, political issues or like work life or things like that, you begin to understand these different sort of norms and values associated with that culture. And then like inside the onion, just in the middle, or like the larger part of the iceberg that is underneath the water, underneath the ocean, and you don't instantly recognize or see or even, sort of understand initially without a lot of reflection, are the deep-rooted assumptions about how the world works that are associated with a particular culture that you were sort of growing up in, right? So it really takes a lot of sort of understanding and reflection to understand sort of what culture is and how it affects the way we sort of interact with the world. So next slide, please. So culture is always fluid and changing, but we think it's given and stable. That's a major sort of misconception about culture. And the easiest way to understand how culture changes is if you look at a certain, let's say, national culture in your own country, and then, look at the differences of opinion, of lifestyles, of norms and values between generations. You can clearly understand that in any sort of particular context, culture changes and from generation to generation. And what's really interesting, I think, in our times is, a generation used to be maybe 20, 30 years or something. Now it's like almost, I think, 3 to 5 years, what we can call a generation, because technology is changing so much that a generation is not just your grandfather, your father, and yourself, but a generation is, I think, just 3 to 5 years with the pace of technological changes and the changes in our lifestyle. So you can see culture changing even sort of more quickly. And another sort of, I think, important sort of metaphor about culture is they are like the glasses through which we see the world. And I'll come back to this in a bit. So next slide, please. So of course, when we talk about culture, most of the time, like international sort of students or traveling across countries, there seems to be this sort of overlapping between nations and cultures. So we think of a culture usually in national terms, like a Malaysian culture or Turkish culture. But we know, of course, nations and cultures do not need to overlap, because we know, for example, in Malaysia, there are three different sort of cultures within the nation, with different sort of religions, languages, ethnic origins, values, norms, and deep-rooted assumptions. Again, going back to that sort of iceberg metaphor, really deep-rooted assumptions about how the world works. So there are subcultures within the nations, and there are, I think this is important to note, cultures that transcend nations. I think today in the global economy, and with the advent of the communication technologies, we can really talk about a youth culture that transcends easily national boundaries. Young people all over the world, I think, share many sort of cultural traits and lifestyles and certain values. So I think we can talk about definitely cultures that transcend the nations as well. So next slide, please. Now, here's the real sort of chicken and egg issue. Does culture shape us, or do we shape culture? And the answer is really, it's a loop. It's both, right? So culture shapes how we perceive even time and space, right? You may think, how is that? Time is like, 60 minutes, 24 hours, a month, a year, it's the same everywhere. Well, no, because, for example, again, if you look at culture, how it sort of affects our perception of time, it's quite different. You may, for example, go to an agricultural community, and then time is really slow moving, slow paced. People are not living in a hurry, always trying to catch up. But if you go to a big city, and this could be Istanbul or KL, time, our perception of time is that time is just sort of moving so fast. We need to sort of rush to get to everywhere, to catch up with things and everything. So our perception of time changes according to the culture, and culture is not necessarily, let's say, this nation or that nation. It could be agricultural versus sort of rural communities versus urban cultures, for example. Culture shapes our notion of space. Every sort of culture has a sort of personal bubble, personal space where you feel comfortable, for example, and safe. And for Turks, that's I don't know, like a shorter, distance, or a smaller space. Could be the same in Malaysia as well. And there was a joke recently I read about the Swedish people, for example, saying, oh, good thing this COVID space 2.5 meters is over. Now we can go back to our 5 meters. Thank God, I mean, this sort of notion of space even is culturally sort of perceived, right? Of course, relations between society and individual, and we know this very well because, in certain cultures, the society, the community, in fact, they prefer the word community rather than sometimes society. That is more important. Whereas, let's say, in what we call sort of Western cultures, the individual is more important. The values and the, let's say, the accomplishments and the personal freedom, all of that is sort of more important than society. So this is always sort of the relation between the society and the individual is always sort of mediated through cultural norms and values. Gender roles, this is like very, very deeply culturally rooted, right? Which genders have more sort of visibility in public spaces, which gender takes up more sort of leadership roles in business or politics, which genders have more sort of caring roles in the family, etc. So these are really culturally mediated things. How we work and play. This is, again, shaped very much by our cultures. In some societies, you see people working for the same company for 40 years, right? And they work maybe day and night, and like office hours don't mean anything. So if you devote your life to the same company and your career is such a big, important part of your life and your identity even, right? You know, you don't turn off your computer at 5 o'clock, right? In some cultures, you know, it's sort of expected that you work overtime. Whereas in other cultures, you know, 5 minutes before 5, people turn off their computers and are out of the building, right? So these are very different sort of approaches to how we work and play that are very much culturally shaped. I don't want to use the word determined. That's too much. I say shaped. Andy, next slide, please. And now this is the other sort of side of the loop. We also shape the culture. You know, the culture is not something given to us by nature, by God, or anything else. One of the important shapers of culture is really the national education system that we go through, right? That gives us many of the sort of the norms and values that we hold dear in our culture. And that's like, especially that, kindergarten and then the K-12 education is very instrumental in shaping a national culture, because it's sort of mandatory. All the children go through that sort of system and come out of it with a certain sort of culture. So what you teach in your schools, especially in that early level, is very much how we shape the national culture. Socialization and family in smaller groups especially is very much how we shape and sort of transmit our cultural values to the next generations. But there are also things that are not exactly sort of in our immediate control. For example, the advent of new technologies and how we adopt these new technologies and how we sort of use these new technologies very much change the culture. Again, how we work, how we play, I said, is very much determined by culture, is very much shaped by culture. But here we go. Now we are using these sort of mobile phones all the time, always in our hands, and now we're sort of addicted to it all over the world, again, sort of transcending national boundaries here. And this is affecting how we work, how we play, how we interact with our peers, with our friends and our colleagues. Certainly you can say that it has become more difficult to sort of separate family time, personal time from business time or study time, because these are all available on our sort of mobile phone all the time. Our attention span is much shorter because we are addicted to these technologies, right? So this is very much changing our culture, I think, again, very quickly because of these technological changes. And of course, our everyday experiences and actions change the culture. We are now living through a global pandemic, and because we are right in the middle of it, we may not realize this now, but I think some years down the line, we'll go back to this time and look at it and see really the changing of the culture because of the global pandemic. The way we, again, interact with our colleagues, with our peers, has changed so much. We have spent much more time in isolation, much more time in digital spaces than in physical spaces, right? So I think because of the effect of the pandemic, because of the changes in our everyday experiences and actions, this will become really an important cultural change. In a few years' time, I think we'll be able to see this clearly. I think people maybe will become more sort of digitalized, and personal face-to-face interactions will become less important in our studies, in our work life, in our personal lives, etc. And we'll be able to see this. This is how everyday experiences and actions really shape our culture. Right. So next slide, please. So of course, when we talk about culture, the next thing that comes to mind is cultural diversity, defined as the existence of a variety of cultural groups within a society. This means a variety of ways of thinking, believing, acting. So basically different interpretations of reality. And if I go back to that sort of wearing the glasses, the culture is like the glasses that you wear, and that's through those glasses, through those lenses, you see the world. Cultural diversity means people have a lot of different glasses, and therefore a lot of different interpretations of reality. Next slide, please. 1 minute, okay, all right. So basically then, in a culturally diverse setting, when people are basically looking at the same thing and interpreting it differently, you have this possibility, a very high probability that there will be sort of misunderstandings, disagreements, and even conflict, right? So in order to avoid some of this conflict, we need intercultural awareness. Next slide, please. So what does intercultural awareness means? Understanding different points of view associated with other cultures. Now, this is the easy part. Now, you talked about this before in the beginning of this sort of session. You know, especially when you go abroad or when you meet people from different cultures, ethnicities, languages, religions, different walks of life, you know, when you sit down and talk to them over this sort of virtual rooftop in a sort of gaming environment, for example, it is easy. It's not that difficult to understand that people have a different way of looking at things. People hold different things dear to them than you do, you know. So, and then you can sort of begin to reflect that this really stems from their sort of different cultural background. What is, I think, more difficult is developing an awareness of your own views, assumptions, and beliefs, and how they are shaped by your culture, right? The understanding how other people are thinking and acting differently is not that difficult. But understanding that your own actions and beliefs are also very particular and they stem from your own culture is sort of more difficult. Having this sort of self-awareness is really the most difficult, I think, part of intercultural awareness. And again, if I go back to the sort of the glasses metaphor, you may have had this, you know, experience with your, let's say, your parents or your grandparents. They may be wearing their glasses, but they forget that they are wearing their glasses, and they are searching for it in the house, and they ask if you've seen their glasses. And you say, they're on your face, you're right? So this sort of self-reflection, self-awareness is really the most tricky part, I think, of intercultural awareness. Right, next slide, please. So again, we refer to this, you talked about this before, intercultural awareness is important to communicate effectively, to work together efficiently, and to be inclusive so that everyone in the society feels valued and taken care of, really. Next slide, please. And intercultural awareness encompasses all these sort of things that I'm going to talk about. Recognizing the cultural diversity, respecting cultural differences, acknowledging the validity of different cultural expressions and contributions, valuing what the other cultures offer, empowering diverse groups to contribute, right? And I think this is the one that's like sort of my favorite, celebrating differences, not just tolerating them, I think this is important. Many of us, again, living in sort of in today's world, we do face in our daily lives people from sort of different cultures in our work environment, on our university campuses, when we travel, etc. So again, seeing the difference, recognizing the difference, it's not that, difficult, but you shouldn't be just tolerating it. The idea with intercultural awareness is that, you see sort of a wealth in that richness, in that sort of difference of opinion, and you are curious about it and you want to learn about it, then it gets you thinking about your own culture and starts your own sort of self-reflection process. So at the end, it's really about celebrating our cultural diversity rather than just tolerating it, right? Next slide, please. Okay, so again, a repetition. Benefits of intercultural awareness. The first one, if we start at the sort of the most general and the abstract level, of course, understanding and tackling complex global challenges today. I don't even have to mention a global pandemic, a global health crisis that we are facing today, the climate change, and the all the other environmental problems that we are facing. These are all very, very complex global or regional problems, but they definitely transcend national boundaries. So the problem is itself is transcending national boundaries. Definitely there's solutions. The way we can address them are transcending national boundaries. So that means we have to understand these complex challenges and be able to work out solutions for them. And these solutions may be from like intergovernmental treaties, organizations, agreements like the World Trade Organization or the Paris sort of agreement on the climate change. It could be just small things in our daily lives, how we sort of care about the environment and do certain things, etc. But these require really being a good global citizen. And that you can only get through this sort of intercultural awareness of the cultural diversity, the celebration of that diversity, and the self-reflection that comes with that. You can only be a good global citizen if you're interculturally aware. Now, you guys talked about the employability in the global economy. And especially if you're working in international settings, if you're working with international teams in the workplace, this is so important. I mentioned how the culture shapes our work ethic, for example, how we sort of contribute to a team, what's the responsibility of the individual within the team, for example. These are very much culturally shaped. And if you're working in a multicultural sort of team, you really have to adjust yourself to how other people approach their work and what they expect of you and what you can expect of them and how you can effectively communicate your expectations of a good project at the end of this sort of work that you do together. So all of this is very, very important when you're getting employed, after you're employed, how well you sort of you move in your career because you're working successfully with this sort of intercultural aware mindset so that you're really successful with your international teams, right? Academic success, if you are interculturally aware and you are currently a student, this is going to be a huge benefit to you to understand sort of different theoretical approaches, to be able to sort of communicate sort of different approaches to the same problem. And this is sort of obvious, let me add, like I studied international relations and political science, right? So especially in social sciences, in humanities, this sort of intercultural awareness and this sort of mindset is very much helpful, and it's obvious, in social sciences. But what you guys mentioned at APU, engineering students taking this intercultural awareness course, some people may say, well, I mean, how an engineering student exactly will benefit from this during the studies. I'm not talking about sort of employability benefits later, but during the studies, because you know what, engineering also, I mean, is about tackling really sort of difficult, let's say, problems in real life and engineering, designing practical solutions to them, right? And you coming from a particular culture may approach the problem and the design solution in a particular way, and another person from a different cultural background may bring a completely different approach. And it's really I think really important for engineering students and sort of design students to have that sort of intercultural mindset of being sort of aware of the contributions of people from different cultural backgrounds, what they can bring to the table. Right? This, I think, creates really interesting contributions from different people, creates sparks sort of creativity, imagination. So I think an engineering student would really benefit from this intercultural mindset. Social benefits, obviously, I mean, just making friends with people from different cultures, I think, is the most enriching experience. It's just like the most fun that you ever have. You know, I was an exchange student in my high school years, and I also, you know, studied abroad as a graduate student. And I think those are the best times of my life, honestly, because you just, you know, nothing is like the same or expected, you know. When you're interacting with different cultures, you learn different things, you know, you get surprised all the time, and you know, you just make friends and realize that there's a bond between the human races that is just, I think, very transformational, right? And that means also personal growth, really, at the sort of the individual level. I think that just is the best way to sort of grow and develop your own potential, to come to your own. Again, I'll go back to that concept of self-reflection and being self-aware. That's really coming into your own skin and realizing your own potential as an individual. So all of this sort of intercultural awareness notion really pushes you into the world, just confronts you with a lot of difference, and then sort of, you know, it takes you all the way back into your own, psyche and your own sort of consciousness in a way. So it all sort of goes out to the world and then comes back to you. It is a mindset, and it's a beautiful one, I think. I was looking, next slide, please, Andy. I was looking at sort of nice inspirational quotes to end the webinar with, and I found two of my favorites, and one is by Desmond Tutu, whom we lost, I think, was it last year or the year before? Yeah, it was recently, yeah. And he had said that differences are not intended to separate, to alienate. We are different precisely in order to realize our need of one another. I think that's a beautiful concept of looking at cultural diversity. And next slide, please. Now, Mikhail Gorbachev, I don't know who remembers him. I'm giving away my age now, guys, but you know, I was like studying international relations when Gorbachev came to power and the whole sort of Cold War system collapsed, the Soviet Union collapsed, etc. So I remember Mikhail Gorbachev. Maybe the younger generation doesn't so much, but an interesting character, certainly an interesting time in history. But he has said, peace is not in unity in similarity, but unity in diversity, in the comparison and conciliation of differences. So I'm going to end with that. And if you have any questions, if you want to just add anything, I'm here.
Okay, thank you, Ayse, for your session. Sorry. Positional Chair. Thank you very much. There's a lot of similarity in what you've been saying and what we've been talking about throughout the session. So again, it's good to know that I think the project is moving in the right way. We're all trying to achieve the same things, and we do have. I need to put the other slide on. So we have one question that's come in. I'll just put this slide on. That's five. Okay, we've got one question that's come in about the difference between diversity and inclusivity. People are, yeah, I guess some institutions or some companies might think that, okay, you've got